Now, we kind of know what's going on for all this stuff and all these different things. But the biggest thing this last year, obviously, has been id Software becoming a part of ZeniMax Media. And that was a shock to a lot of people. And in fact, internally, when it was going on, the first meeting that Todd had, where he mentioned to everyone on the board, it's like, hey, we're having some discussions with these guys from ZeniMax Media. I said, who? I had to go in, look up on the internet and say, oh, Bethesda people. Okay, so that now I have something to kind of correlate all that with. But it was an interesting thing. And I know when most people heard that id Software was being acquired, the question was it Activision or EA? And that would be the only things that people would consider there. And honestly, if you had asked me several years ago if id Software is ever acquired, I would think, well, it's probably going to be Activision or EA. And it is interesting that, honestly, I try to stay out of most of the business stuff as much as possible. I mean, I'm a maker, I'm an engineer, I like to spend most of my time in front of my computer actually producing something. And while over the last several years, we've tried to get a lot more sort of rigorous and responsible about running the company properly, just because we've got so many people in it. When you have a dozen people, you can afford to kind of go do whatever you want. You know everybody, you know what everything's going on. But when you've got 50, 60, 70, 80, 90, 100 people, you have to start paying a little bit more attention to that. So over the last few years, we've had our regular board meetings, and I've been sitting there going to the board meetings. When they go over about an hour, I start getting these spastic twitches about wanting to get out of the business meetings and get back to actually doing some productive work on building things. But the acquisition talks have been going on. It takes a long time to sort of finish these things up. And we've had these offers since the very beginning. Most of you probably don't realize that id Software was almost bought by Sierra Online right about the time we were releasing Wolfenstein. And that was, we were all down in California seeing the Williams out there. And that was something that could have gone one way and wound up not going that way. And it all worked out well. But we would get a steady stream of offers over the years, and it's always flattering when people come up and say, toss out some big number figure about wouldn't you like to sell the company for this? But, we took a lot of pride in being an independent company, and there were some things to be said about that. There was an email or a discussion on Slashdot a few years ago about independent game studios. And there was a passage on there when people were talking about that, and somebody brought up id. And you had one of those little manifesto types that goes on about independent studio starving artist types. And I was really heartened when somebody else pitched in and said, no, id Software is an independent studio. They're just a successful one as the difference there. And there's some level of pride in being one of the few remaining big independent studios that's not part of a larger corporate structure. But it's always something that you balance out. It was never, going into doing this was never because we desperately wanted our own company. We wanted to build our games. We wanted to be in an effective position to do that. And we've gone a long ways and done a lot of good things there. But we've always kind of kept our eyes on what we're doing, what the options are. And some of the things that we've really seen over the last several years as we've gone through the last few big projects, Quake 2, Quake 3, Doom 3, working with all the other stuff, is that more and more there's been a tension between the independent developers and the larger publishers. For instance, when we first started doing the early work with Activision, we were their shooter guys. id Software was Activision's FPS arm, and we went out and did the titles, and everybody's pushing for the same thing. But as Activision grew as a company and they brought more studios on, they had other people that were doing similar things, and we would find that as an external developer, we're to some degree competing with our own publisher there. And there's nothing, they're not colluding about it or anything. It's just a natural way that things happen. If you're part of a company there and you have your internal IP that you've spent tens of millions of dollars developing, and you've got your external IP that you're paying a really large royalty rate to this company for, if you've got a choice about how certain things are done, whether it's marketing resources or how you want to present things, how you want to slate things, marketing, production resources, these decisions, just as a large company, they get made in their best interests, which are usually not exactly the best interests of the external companies. That was part of the move towards EA partners with Rage, and that we felt that there was a little bit less tension on that because of the way that organization is structured there. But it's still not the same thing where when they're working for an outside developer, they don't have the same level of buy-in. No publisher does, because if they're going to put $20 million into marketing something, they feel a whole lot better inside if it's their own product. If they know that they're going to be doing the sequels, they're going to have all of this stuff going on. While if they know that they're spending all of this money building up the IP for something that could wind up going to a competitor next cycle, or just somebody else's value that they're building up, it's not real comfortable for them for all these eminently understandable reasons. So that's just something that we've been living with over the last few years, and our game plan, if you'd asked us a year ago, and in fact, I joke to some of the employees that these talks that I give here at QuakeCon is sort of our game plan going forward. And I was talking last year about how we were doing with internally developing Doom, how we're going to take it all the way to sort of a vertical slice on our own nickel like we did with Rage, and then we're really going to twist some arms on the publishers to make them cough up a really good value for us. That worked well for us on Rage. We had built up the team, it was going well, and that was still a perfectly fine plan. And we were always at the position where, well, if none of this works out, that's what we're doing. We're going to continue building Quake Live. We're going to continue building our mobile stuff. These smaller, lower-risk projects let us sort of experiment on things. They are, in many ways, those are the tentative steps of a less well-capitalized company. While id Software is plenty successful, we make a lot of money, we're able to go off and do new things, like I can say, I want to do mobile products, or I think we should do a web version of Quake Arena, and we can go make those things happen. But they're still, those are things that are measured steps. They're things that we know that we can build out of our own pocket, we can fund ourselves, but there are certain things that we would not do on our very own, like take a brand new AAA title, build up a third team, and try and run that all on our own before signing a publishing deal, because that costs, $20-some million or something plus to get to that level. So the steps that we would take as a company when we were completely independent were cautious. They were things that we knew would succeed based on kind of our previous work, or were things that we could afford to see fail. And that that affects how we staff things, what people we put on different projects, and all sorts of things like that. But it was still a good plan, and we were fine going forward. When we really got down to talking about what would be the benefits of becoming a part of ZeniMax, becoming essentially a partner with Bethesda, it was interesting in that, again, a year ago, I probably wouldn't have thought about this level of benefit. While we always talked with the whole range of publishers, and while, like, on the last pitch for Rage Publishing, in the end it came down to EA and Activision, but we had some really good offers, and we felt good about some of the people at THQ and Sega. They came in, they made good pitches, and unfortunately, in the end, it just kind of came down to we felt more secure with the larger companies. And when we take that to say, well, how did we wind up then becoming a part of a company that's not one of these massive kind of the behemoths of the industry there? But when we look at it from becoming a part of the company, there's kind of different measures of what's good for us in there. If you're going to be part of a company there, you want to make sure that you're not going to be internally competing with established people inside there, where if we did become part of Activision, there's a couple studios in there that we would be, right there with about who's going to be doing what shooter in what quarter, how are we going to schedule all of this out, how is this going to be differentiated from this other one. It's like, well, if you want to do it that way and they want to do it this way, maybe somebody has to give a little bit so you don't step on each other's toes too much. With Bethesda, it was one of those, it's hard to imagine a more perfect fit between two companies there, where you've got two companies that do absolute top-notch AAA titles. There's not a lot of dead weight going on in the Bethesda team on there. With the products that they've put out, they define state-of-the-art top-notch in what they do. But what they do is this completely separate genre from what we do. There's obviously a lot of overlap in the players between it. I mean, lots of good cheers for Fallout and Elder Scrolls here, because a lot of you play those games, but they're not direct competitors. What we're doing with Wolfenstein, Rage, Quake, Doom, all this all this stuff over here is really orthogonal to what Bethesda does with Elder Scrolls and Fallout and some of the other things that they're working on there. So we can look into this and say, there are things that each of us can do to help each other there. It's great to be able to start opening talks with them about technology sharing. There's not going to be any wholesale engine changes anywhere. I mean, they have their technical path, we have our technical path, but it's going to be great to just be able to help them. And I've always been in this position where, as anybody that's heard me talk here or has caught me someplace, at any convention or after, I'm always more than happy to lay out any technical plan, give advice or anything on there. But there's always, a little bit there where you shouldn't. When you've got competitors on there, I kind of look at the fraternity of programmers and game developers as a little bit more open, and I'm more happy to share there than a lot of people might be. But still, there's